Earlier in September, we talked about how economists and pundits made a subtle rhetorical shift. They stopped saying K-shaped recovery and started saying K-shaped economy. It's a self-explanatory visual that suggests that people are continuing to move up the ladder while others are on the slide. So today we're going to look at 5 indicators that most people don't pay close attention to because we're conditioned to track headline figures like inflation or stock market performance, prices at the pump, and unemployment. But by the end of this video, you'll be able to dismantle arguments from anyone who says that everything is fine with this economy. In fact, I have a fun warm-up exercise to kind of loosen us up. For the MeidasTouch Network, I'm Max from UNFTR. Let's go. Okay, so here's our fun exercise to begin. Joe from Squawk Box on CNBC recently interviewed Senator Elizabeth Warren about the Fed rate cut. But before they talked rates, Joe teed the senator up with several questions within a question. Now, polemicists refer to this technique as gish gallop, where you rapid-fire arguments at your opponent to take them off course. And in this case, it worked because the senator, in my humble opinion, didn't answer the questions. Now, to be fair, it's hard to do on the spot. So take a listen to his arguments, and I shall take the liberty of addressing them one by one.
The inflation rate of 2.9 is still above where the Fed would like it to be, but it was as high as 9% under Joe Biden. Right. The labor market may be showing signs of weakness, but unemployment is still 4.3%. Real wages are finally growing. The Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ are all hitting record highs. We've had major trade deals signed and hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign investment coming into the country, while the southern border is now secure and Iran's nuclear ambitions have been sidetracked likely for years. Right. Where is the calamity?
Where's the calamity? You know, I'm guessing that old Joe's stock portfolio is ripping these days. Did you know that all 3 major indices hit record highs simultaneously this past week? How fun! How about we lift up the rug to see what's been swept beneath, though, and then we'll answer old Joe's queries one at a time.
The inflation rate of 2.9 is still above where the Fed would like it to be, but it was as high as 9% under Joe Biden.
All right. Well, first of all, inflation has ticked up 0.1% every single month over the past 6 months, which would be the wrong direction, especially if we're still claiming that we're dealing with the inflation highs under Biden, which means that none of this was ever transitory. Also, and this one will be important later, here's a look at food inflation, which is the most important component for the vast majority of Americans. So if Joe was dealing in present-day reality, check out that August spike. But more importantly, check out the August figure compared to last August. Yikes. So, no, inflation not under control.
The labor market may be showing signs of weakness, but unemployment is still 4.3%.
Still at 4.3%, huh? Well, we've talked a lot about this one. Let's take a look at what's happening among recent college graduates and youth employment. Young people are finding it harder and harder to find a job, with unemployment in this age group approaching post-housing crisis and dot-com bubble levels. Also, unemployment measures the recently laid off who are still actively seeking employment within the months of the current survey. It doesn't count the people who have dropped out of the job hunt, which is up dramatically year over year. It also doesn't count the chronically underemployed who require assistance or gig economy workers. To look at the overall trend, consider this. On an absolute basis, this tracks the number of people gainfully employed in the workforce over time. I think this trend is also pretty self-explanatory, so maybe don't quote the unemployment rate. Also, the boomer generation is still 20% of the population, and they're leaving the workforce in droves, though some still have to supplement with side jobs, as a shocking percentage of boomers are not financially prepared to retire comfortably.
Real wages are finally growing.
Not sure this is a hill that he wants to die on. Also, he might want to stay abreast of current trends. As of August, real wage growth dipped again. Real wage growth measures wages adjusted for inflation. Inflation, in this case, is CPI, so it considers a full basket of goods and services. So if you add it all up, it appears on the surface that workers are staying slightly ahead of the curve over time. But if we go back to the food inflation chart, recall that food increased by the highest level in August at 3%, and that's why the overall wage growth declined. Food purchases make up a more significant share of inflation because it's vital to existence. And Trump's tariffs are very directly and immediately impacting food prices, so this is only going to get worse, Joe. And I can't help but wonder, when's the last time you visited a supermarket? Anywho, let's move on.
The Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ are all hitting record highs.
Right you are, Joseph. The three major indices did indeed hit record highs on the same day. So if you're well-heeled enough to play in the markets, then you are doing pretty well right now. Now, one of the reasons for that is the historic amount of cash sitting on corporate balance sheets between actual cash and marketable securities, estimated between $3 and $5 trillion worth, mind you. Another is the record amount of stock buybacks that have occurred even though earnings are down relative to share price, i.e. we have elevated PE ratios sitting at historical highs. And the third reason is that companies are earning such high returns in fixed income because the yields are high that they have money to pour back into the stocks. And by the way, elevated yields are a sign of weakness. And the last reason relates to your next assertion.
And hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign investment coming into the country.
That's right. Foreign investment has increased, but only in one area, the U.S. stock market. Everyone is riding the wave for as long as they can in U.S. equities because they're inflating the bubble. Now, we're going to come back to that one at the end in our 5 indicators because it tells us a lot. But what else you got, Joe?
We've had major trade deals signed.
Oh, trade deals. Yes. How could I forget? Slight correction. A trade deal is NAFTA or the USMCA now. The Chorus FTA, which is between South Korea and the United States. The Australia-US FTA. Those are trade deals. Tariffs are not deals. They're taxes on us, on U.S. importers that flow through to us. And while a couple of countries have, quote, signed off on them, they're not trade agreements. They're one-sided tariffs that are contributing to inflation, burning international bridges, forging new alliances between nations that are working around us, and generally tanking the world economy, if that's what you mean by deals.
The southern border is now secure.
Yes, indeed. The southern border is closed for business. And in the process, we've carved a dangerous path forward by eliminating civil liberties and due process, sent individuals that followed the proper asylum procedures to concentration camps here and abroad, and some have died in captivity. We've also gutted the U.S. agricultural labor force and torn entire communities apart in the process.
And Iran's nuclear ambitions have been sidetracked likely for years.
First of all, we don't actually know that for sure, now do we? Now, there's speculation in the international community that the attacks did minimal damage and that crucial materials had already been moved from the bombed sites prior to the U.S. attacks on these facilities. Also, we don't know for sure what state it's in because Iran has expelled all international observers because of said strikes. So for all we know, we're worse off than before. But you know when we had ironclad evidence that Iran didn't possess nuclear capacity? Under the Iran nuclear deal with Obama, when inspectors were allowed into the country and we had engaged in talks to reduce sanctions on their population. Isn't that fun? Gosh, I love doing that. Anyway, let's talk about the 5 non-headline indicators that illustrate the extent to which this administration is destroying the U.S. economy further. Because as you've heard me probably say before, I don't lay blame exclusively on this administration for the economic dislocation in the economy. My central contention is that the majority of this population never fully emerged from the Great Recession, and that the bust cycles of the capitalist system would grow increasingly violent toward the working class and the middle class. Because we refuse to grapple with the two-tier economy and recognize the genuine suffering among the bottom half. And the reason for that is that the top 10% of the economy is responsible for over half of consumer spending, so that's just where the attention goes. Now, if you want my most recent and complete thoughts on where we're headed, I just posted a video on UNFTR that paints a pretty dire picture of the dark chapter that we've just entered. Now, it's a long and sometimes pedantic video that's not for the faint of heart, so you've been warned. To the topic at hand, there are 5 indicators that the economy is needlessly in great danger specifically due to Trump's policies and ineptitude. Number 1, credit scores. Credit score averages dipped a full 2 points year over year in the most recent report from FICO. That's a troubling sign, but not the story I want to tell. What the report focuses on is what's in this graph specifically. that credit scores for the top income tier have actually increased over 2021, which is the post-pandemic benchmark year in the report. Whereas the bottom end of the income spectrum made some legitimate gains after this period, which is the result of stimulus checks and unemployment insurance, the number of people whose scores have dipped in the last couple of years has actually grown. Again, this is an example of the two-tier or the K-shaped economy. More and more Americans are sliding down the bottom line of the K, which is why bankruptcies are up 11.5% year over year. Household credit is at an all-time high. Student loan defaults are off the charts. And subprime and payday loans are delinquent and defaults are skyrocketing. Number 2. Oil is one of my favorite topics. This is a chart and recent headline from oilprice.com. Fed rate cut fails to lift oil as inventories weigh. Now here's what you're looking at. The US is pumping a crazy amount of oil. The rest of the world is as well. And inventories are beginning to pile up because demand is softening across the globe. A couple of really important points here. Crude oil is below the price that producers can make money, for the most part. Also, prices should be a lot higher because we just bombed 2 Venezuelan ships. They were drug ships, not oil ships, but Venezuela is a significant oil producer, so when tensions like that arise, prices always go up. We also have massive sanctions or tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil, something in the past that would have also driven prices through the roof. The US bombed Iran. Israel bombed Qatar. These type of events would normally wreak havoc in the fossil fuel markets. Instead, crickets. The prices will not budge. Why? Because everyone knows we're already in a recession and that we caused it. By the way, it's the only thing keeping inflation from doubling right now. Number 3. Here's a fun one. Travel to the United States. This is from the National Travel and Tourism Office. The circled red part there says that every 40 international visits supports 1 U.S. job. Cool. Well, under Trump, international visits to the United States are down 3%. And guess who's sticking it to us the most?
Let's start with cross-border travel in particular. It's not just a slump, it's really in free fall. With trips by automobile in August, it was down 35% in August alone. And when we first started talking about this phenomenon, it was really a land border thing, if you'll remember. Well, now we also have some data on air travel as well. That's down 25% year over year. In August, Air Canada has cut back a number of its U.S. routes, or downsize some of the planes on some of the routes to American cities. But that doesn't mean travel demand has dried up. They've actually added 28 international routes to destinations beyond the United States. Canadians still want to travel. They're going to Europe, the Caribbean, and South America instead.
That's right. Our best friends to the north aren't just putting elbows up. They're putting up the middle finger and taking their holidays elsewhere. And who can blame them? Number 4. Now, we've covered this one, but it usually doesn't make headlines all that much. It's the Conference Board Leading Economic Index. Here they plot 2 lines. The one that's going up and to the right shows where the economy is right now. The one that's plummeting shows where it's headed. The reason that the black line, called the coincident line, continues upward is because it's skewed by financial indicators, i.e. the stock market. What you'll notice is that these 2 lines usually part briefly, right before a downturn, but that the downturn always comes. Always. This has been the most effective indicator of recessions that economists have used for a very, very long time. So right now, the lines are further apart than they've ever been, which indicates that we are quite possibly in the biggest bubble that we've ever seen. Just something to consider. And our last one is from the Treasury. All right, so I'm not going to post a chart for this one. I've done it in the past, but the numbers are really small, and I'm just going to talk through it quickly because the data is kind of ugly and static. Now, we've talked about tick data before. This is the Treasury International Capital Report that shows whether money is coming into the U.S. or it's leaving it, and where it's going to and coming from. And save for anomalies like Trump's Liberation Day fiasco, the United States always has a net inflow. We are still the big dog economy, no matter how you measure it. Also, it's very difficult to purchase Chinese government bonds on the open market, so that helps. So tick data tracks money from official and private sources. Official is basically nations, so central banks. Private means anything from corporations to sovereign wealth funds. So through July of this year versus last year, the most recent data that we have shows that private inflows have doubled. But official investments have quadrupled the other way. So through July of this year, more money has gone out of the United States than into it on the official numbers. But these numbers are smaller than the private sources because corporations run the world. So net, the U.S. is bringing in more money than we're investing elsewhere, but the numbers are getting tighter and tighter. Even still, that's not the real story. The real story is in where the money is actually going. So the Treasury Department divides investment by Treasury notes and bonds, which is the federal government agency bonds, which is like municipal bonds and other government secured notes, corporate bonds, and U.S. equities or the stock market. So Treasury bonds and government agency bonds are down year over year. Corporate bonds are up by about 50 billion net. The U.S. stock market increased by 770 billion year over year. That's where the money's going. And that's where a lot of it is coming from. The money isn't going to you and me. It's going into the pockets of shareholders. The value isn't coming from company performance either. It's coming into the market because investors are looking for yield. And while earnings certainly don't warrant this level of investment, everyone is caught up in the number go up fever that fills the bubble. So if you want to know what happens when the bubble pops, like I said, you can check out our YouTube at UNFTR. But you've been warned. It's not a happy ending. For the MeidasTouch Network, I'm Max from UNFTR. Thanks as always to the Meidas Mighty and to the Mycelis brothers for having me over. Until next time, heads down, elbows up.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.